Good. Okay, on the table were two documents. Today's class is a document that looks like this. This is what I always use, which we're still in chapter 5. This is the third week on chapter 5. So we're moving slowly. I feel a little bad about that, but on the other hand, these are the Lord's words and in his sermon. And so I feel bad about skipping. His words aren't irrelevant to me. So if I skip over his words, that seems worse than spending a little bit of time, extra time, delving into verse by verse. So we'll see. I'm not saying we're going to go this slowly through all of chapter 5, 6, and 7, because the Sermon on the Mount takes 3 chapters. We'll be here forever if I go this slow. Anyway, the other document was because, as you see today, we are going to begin talking about the law. And that reminded me of a document I created for this class back in May. And so on the table is a document called A Simple Way to Pray. And Martin Luther wrote this for his barber. His barber asked him to teach him to pray. So he wrote, now if you look at this document, it's 18 pages long, so there's nothing simple about this. But anyway, the reason I'm not handing this out today, I'm going to pass it around. So I want to find out how many copies of this do I make, because it's so big. So take a look at it. If you'd like me to ask Andrea to make a copy, I will. Now, what's actually in there is 2 things. I went through Luther's Simple Way to Pray in the left column, and in the right-hand column, I have the small catechism. So they line up. So, for example, while Luther is talking about the first commandment in the Simple Way to Pray, on the right-hand column, you see the small catechism on the first commandment. So that's how that thing is arranged. She's already seen it.
Oh,
And I think Bob has already seen it. I think Daniel might be the only person that hadn't seen it.
Did all this stuff? Did you see that?
I did see it. I will make copies.
You want me to just turn this in, or can I keep
No,
it?
you can keep the one.
Okay, because I
Honestly,
have one.
honestly, you can keep the one. You can, but I did email this to everybody. You all have it in your email.
Yeah, well, I don't do emails, so this is.
I knew you'd be the one dinosaur who doesn't have it. So anyway,
I have it in my email.
that's what those documents are. So today we are in this document, and since we're talking about law, I decided I was going to share something else that I had prepared in previous class, changing the share to this document. Back 2 or 3, I don't remember when it was, 2 years ago, we did the small catechism. We had a section on the 10 commandments. And so just in the class, teaching on the 10 commandments, I brought this document right here to discuss with the class at that time, and I think it needs to be reiterated. We're going to talk about law today. And this is not exclusively Lutheran, but I can say it's Reformation. Both the Lutherans and the Reformed churches and the Calvinists all agree that there are 3 reasons. This particular one comes from, notice at the very top of the screen, You can find it in what's known as the epitome of the Formula of Concord. Formula of Concord was written in 1577, published in 1580 in the Book of Concord. Anyway, there are three reasons we have the law. The first one is the most direct. God wants you to do these. These are God's precepts for what life is supposed to be like. And they are not, they're not changeable. They last forever. These are God's words. He's serious about this. He expects you to keep his commandments.
But the thing is, like, we can't.
Well, hold on a second. Now, the problem is then we look at ourselves and we look at either our attempts to keep the law or our failure to keep the law. Either one. In either case, we find that we mess it up. If I really try to keep the law, if I focus on keeping the law, my focus becomes on me. I'm looking at my belly button to see how well I'm doing. And I'm not looking at my neighbor who's sitting right next to me who needs help. I'm looking at the wrong person. But again, if I really look at myself, I find out that, I don't really keep the law anyway. I fail at keeping the law. So the real use that Lutherans like to use is the second use. That men therefore may be led to the knowledge of their sins and then directed to the cross of Christ.
Yeah.
So the second use of the law is, Lord, I can't keep your commandments. Even when I try, I fail. So have mercy. Lord, have mercy is number two. Now, the third use is a little bit problematic for Lutherans because we like to think in terms of law and gospel. The law tells us what our sin is, and the gospel frees us through forgiveness of our sin. So you are forgiven. Jesus gives you mercy. You ask for mercy, he gives you mercy. You're done. You don't have any use for law. Or do you? Lutherans come on both sides of this. The third use of the law says, after they are regenerated, which simply means born again. After you're born again, they might, on this account, want a rule about how to regulate and direct their life. Don't you, as a saved Christian, want to know what Jesus wants you to do?
Yes.
Not because it's going to save you, just because he's your Lord.
Yeah.
So what do I do day by day? What do I do?
Yes.
That's the third use of the law. So some Lutherans say, no, you shouldn't mess it up. You've already been told what the law is in step one. You've been saved through mercy in step two. Stop teaching. Rule 3 says, yeah, but people want to know what's next. What do you do with your life? So anyway, those are the three uses. But notice, step 2, we can't do it. We can't do it, and we have to ask for mercy. I want you to have that perspective because we're going to be taught. Jesus is going to be slamming law. We don't usually think of Jesus as law, but he is hitting us with law in this section.
Basically.
This is what I want you to do. Bang, 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 bang. And I can't. Lord have mercy. Okay. I'm going to change the share again to get back to my document. Where is it? Right here. Should change the document automatically, but it doesn't. Okay. So now we're ready to get to today's actual discussion. Come on. A little bigger. There you go. Scroll down. We had gotten through two paragraphs at the top of the page, salt and light. We pointed out this was 2 weeks ago when we were last together. Jesus is telling us that good teaching and preaching tells people what their sin is and tells people what the gospel is. That's the salt and the light. The world needs salt. Salt is useful. So is light. The world needs light, or you stumble into things. So the gospel is the salt and the light goes out into the world. That's where we were last. Okay. Now, verse 17 is where we finally begin today. We have Jesus saying, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets." Do not think that I've come to abolish. Told you he's going to hit us with law. So Jesus is saying some people, when they hear the gospel and how Jesus loves them, it's all sweet and nice. It could sound sweet and nice. That's what he's saying. Yeah.
I think I get it. I think you're saying, oh, Jesus loves me, so that means I don't have to do any more law, so I'm gonna do everything to sin.
Yeah, that is one of that happened. Paul said, "Don't do it that way either."
Yeah.
Paul said some people have started to say, "Well, if Jesus saves me, if his business is to save me from my sin, then my job is to provide the sin. I should sin more, so Jesus gets to do his job." And Paul says, "Heaven forbid." Boy, have you got the wrong, that's Paul. But anyway, so that's Jesus' point here. I'm not come to abolish. Notice, I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. That sentence needs some understanding. So Jesus has not come to say that the law doesn't matter. In fact, he says, what do you do when you fulfill your destiny or you fulfill your obligations? You perform them, right? You live up to them. So for Jesus to fulfill the law is not to say the law goes away, but rather that the law's purpose is
Help you to
the words just escape me. He fulfills. He has completed the law.
Yeah.
He's done everything that the law expected for us. But notice, he has done it, not us. We already agree that we can't keep the law even when we try. Jesus was different. He is the only person who has ever kept the law. So he can talk like this. He can say, I've come to fulfill them. But also, notice, he has satisfied their purpose. Purpose of the law to the Jews was to make a person righteous. They believed, and they may still today believe, that if they could only keep the law day by day by day, they would be righteous. God would love them. God would benefit them. That's their understanding of how the world works. Do the law, and God will reward you. And you will be righteous. Christians say, no, the problem there is none of us can keep the law. So we fail. And so how are we made righteous? We are made righteous not by keeping the law, but by Jesus giving us his righteousness. Right? On the cross, his death takes our sin away and gives us his righteousness. So notice, gives us his righteousness. So since he has fulfilled the law, it is as if I have fulfilled the law. Not because I did anything, but because Jesus did it. He gives it to me. So I am fulfilled. Anyway, just in case you missed it, I tell you the truth. By the way, that's God language. When God speaks, he's telling you this should be written down. This is God speaking. Write these words down. That's I tell you. He's not arguing because you think he's a liar. He's just saying this is God talk. Where was I? Until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen. Now he's getting really specific. He's not only saying the first and the second and the third commandments, but he's even saying the capital T or the I, the dot over the I. Every character that makes up the first commandment, the second commandment, the third commandment. He's talking about even just when you write, you use your pen and you put a dot over the I. That is critical, he says. Now we don't usually teach about dots of I's and T and crossing the T. So Ed has decided to come to see us. So you had to choose between C.S. Lewis and the Book of Revelation.
Actually, I didn't get to watch either. I keep getting pulled in so many different directions.
Okay, well,
I'm losing out on everything. We got
glad
such
to hear.
good stuff going.
We are talking about we're still in chapter 5. We've been in chapter 5 for 3 weeks. Today it's a heavy dose of the law. You're not used to Jesus teaching the law. You think of Jesus and gospel, but Jesus is trying to get us to see how critical the law is. And we're just reading this section at the top of where were we, verse 17 and 18. He's not abolishing the law. He is fulfilling the law. And now he's even saying, even this is where I love when you came in. Every word, every syllable, every letter of every word is going to be there until all things are accomplished. Now, just where does he say that? He says that in verse 18, until all things are accomplished. Now, being Christians, we have a little bit of inside information. Jesus says when all things are accomplished. When does Jesus accomplish his mission?
By dying cross.
By dying on the cross. Now, you could also say, well, what about coming again at the end of time? So the answer is both. But most importantly, I think Dan has it right. It's when Jesus dies on the cross. That's when our obligation in the law is completely met. He dies, takes our sin and our inability to keep the law, and gives us his righteousness, or in other words, his ability to keep the law.
How about baptizing? When John baptized
Jesus?
Yeah.
What's your point? Is that you're saying that's when it was accomplished? That's not the end of the story. That's the beginning of the story.
That's the beginning.
Yeah. He begins his ministry with John's baptism. Anyway, let's keep going. We're now at verse 19. Now here's where teachers like myself, preachers who have a role beyond mine, need to read these words carefully. Anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commandments will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So he wants this taught. He wants these commandments taught. And you're going to see in a minute, we're as Pastor Hannah's joke, we're going to get into murder and adultery. This is going to be a fun class. I did say to him today, nobody has asked me why you're an expert. Why are you an expert on murder and adultery? I'll explain how I'm a murderer and an adulterer. when we get to that section. Just hold on to your seat. I'm both. I'm a murderer and an adulterer, just in case you're wondering. Okay. Teachers are supposed to teach this law, is his point. Now, Jews had a number of ways to make the law doable. Keep it in size. The commandment says, for example, keep the Sabbath day holy. That's the actual commandment in Exodus. So the Jews sat down and said, okay, well, how exactly do I do that? What can I do and what can't I do? And to keep that commandment. So they came up with some rules. I don't know how many of the 613 rules applies to Sabbath, but their objective is maybe there's 25 rules. I don't know. Does it say there's 25 rules that make up the Sabbath rules? What they tell themselves is, if I do those 25 things, then I've kept this commandment. So they were not trying to make the Sabbath, the commandment harder. They were trying to make it doable. If I know the rules, if I know exactly what I can do, step by step by step, then I will keep the commandments. And I will be righteous. God will bless me. That was the Jewish system. Jesus is going to do exactly the opposite. He's going to say the commandments are impossible. He doesn't ever use that exact word. But now, picture Jesus talking to a group of people like this, except that one or two of the people sitting in the room are the pinnacle of the religious authority. It would be like our pastor or bishop or somebody was sitting in the room, okay? In their case, the Pharisees and the priests and the scribes were the pinnacle of theological power. And he says this, I put it in red. This is not red because it's Jesus' words. These are all Jesus' words. I put it in red just to highlight it. He says something that is truly shocking to a Jewish ear. Unless you are more righteous than the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you cannot go to heaven.
You're trying to like,
So the implication would be the Pharisees and the scribes aren't going to heaven because you got to be better than them. They think they're great at it. They've got all these 613 rules down pat. They know exactly what they're doing day by day by day. They think they are righteous. And Jesus is saying they're not going to heaven. Isn't that what that says?
yeah, because the thing that the righteous says is what we're not.
They're not righteous. And Jesus says, now, so you don't get off the hook either. You've got to be better than them. And they are good at what they do. The Pharisees were the pinnacle of law keeping. They were the best there is. So Jesus is saying you've got to be better than the best there is. Now, just remember, don't panic. Remember what I said at the beginning. What is the Lutheran, not just Lutheran, what is the Christian answer to this situation? I look at the law, and Jesus is telling me you got to do it perfectly. And I say, Lord, I can't do it perfectly. Lord, have mercy, is what I say. And Jesus says, yes, you have mercy. Your sins are forgiven. That's how this works. But for now, we're going deeper. Okay, more law. So here it goes. Now here's where I'm an expert in murder. We'll get to adultery later. Luckily, my wife's not in the room, so we can talk about this. Okay, but here's the murder one, verse 21. You've heard it said long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. In the old Jewish system, and today we have a similar system, murder is a capital crime. If you commit murder and they arrest you, you will be tried for murder and perhaps, depending on how our laws work, subject to the death penalty, subject to judgment. That's what that says. If you murder, you will be killed. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, okay, that whole thing. Now, so that's not unfamiliar to us. We understand that idea. You've heard it said, anyone who murders. Now, imagine what the Pharisees did with that rule. They said, okay, that's a very easy one to understand. Don't kill someone else. Just don't do it. I don't have to explain that to you, right? Just do not kill another human being. As long as I haven't killed anybody today, I am righteous. Right? That's what you would hear. If you didn't kill, you are righteous. If you are righteous, God, now listen to this, God owes me benefits. I'm a good guy. God should put blessings on me. Jesus says, oh boy, you missed it. So he said, but I say, I love it when Jesus does this. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Oops. Jesus says, if you're angry, and I kind of like the idea of using the word brother here, or brother and sister. Now, to be honest, he's probably not talking about your siblings. He's probably talking about brothers and sisters like we are here in the church family. But it is also useful to think anybody who grew up in a family who had siblings, brothers and sisters, anger is just part of being a kid, right? Your brother or sister does something and you get mad and they get mad and who hit who and mom and dad are going crazy because the kids are going nuts. So, but that's less of a case in more of an adult group that we have here. But anger in any human relationship is just natural. It happens. So we all are familiar with anger. Look what Jesus says. Angry with your brother will be subject to judgment. That's exactly the same line up there on the murder line. If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment, which means you'll be found guilty, and in their day, they probably would have you stoned. I don't know. The Jews did not crucify. Romans crucified, but the Jews did two things. I know they stoned people, and the other one was crushing. Can you imagine that? Lay somebody down on the ground, put boards on them, and then start piling rocks on the boards. That was a death penalty in the book of Deuteronomy. Crushing. Ugh. Okay. Anyway, that's judgment. The point is, notice that in verse 21, will be subject to judgment, and in verse 22, if you're anger, subject to judgment. So it's the same. It's the same result, and that's why I'm a murderer. I've been angry. I understand the human concept of anger. It happens. So yes, Lord. Now I see. It's not just that I didn't kill somebody today. That's good. I should get a check mark for that. But if the guy cuts me off in traffic while I'm driving into church, anger just happens. I don't really have control of it. I mean, I can wish I was just always a nice guy, but that's not how anger works. Anger swells up before you can pat it down. So anger is an emotion, and emotions are an awful lot harder to control. Now, that doesn't mean I have to hit somebody or kill somebody, but anger just happens. I'm,
How?
I'm not going to say it's completely out of my control because there's some ways I can do it, but for the most part, emotions just happen to us. And Jesus is saying, you're done. You're fried because of the anger. Go ahead.
Okay. So like we all saved by Christ, right?
Yes.
That's how.
Saved by Christ.
And what is Jesus trying is saying? Like,
He's saying, don't think about self-righteousness.
oh, okay, good.
See, the Pharisees would say, I didn't kill anybody today, therefore I'm righteous.
I think that's
And Jesus is saying, no, you're not righteous because you were angry with your brother. And that anger that you have with your brother is just as bad as the killing. So
I see.
it's really against self-righteousness.
Yeah, that's
I can check off all 613 rules, and I'm great.
Jesus.
Anyway, let's keep going. Now, the next one is actually one that isn't well defined. Nobody knows exactly what the word raka means. It appears only once in the Bible, and this is it. So Jesus is saying, don't say to your brother, raka. Well, since we don't know what it is, what's he saying? I read one commentator that said, listen to it. Listen to the word. It sounds bad. Raka. It's an expressive word. Now, I don't know exactly what it means, but look at the next sentence. The next sentence says fool. That I know what it is. So Jesus has got two insults here. And maybe I don't know exactly what raka means, but it sounds bad. Just to your ear, it sounds bad. And we know that calling somebody a fool is bad. So Jesus is saying, look, it's not even anger. It's if I am derogatory to somebody, if I hurt somebody's reputation by calling them names, by thinking that somebody is less than they are, if I belittle, that's a good word, belittle them, I make them small, then maybe I'm not killing them. Maybe I'm not angry with them. I'm just disgusted with them. They are nothing to me. Jesus says, you've just committed a sin against the fifth commandment. That's what murder is. Okay, so that makes me a murderer. I've been angry, I've been derogatory, and moving on. The next one is a little bit odd. We don't think in these terms, but we actually do it. But we don't think in these terms. Your gift at the altar. In Jewish times, you brought an animal to be sacrificed, and depending on they had a sliding scale depending on how wealthy you were. So if I was poor, I would bring a couple turtle doves. If I was a little bit richer, I would bring a lamb. And if I was very rich, I would bring an oxen, a big cow. Okay, I'm bringing these to the temple to be butchered and to be burned on the altar. And the way this worked was, this established my righteousness. Just like the Pharisee in my example up above, once you gave your gift, you would think to yourself, well, I have done what God expects of me, so therefore I am righteous. At least for a time. I'm righteous for a time. Now, Jesus says, okay, take that example. Somebody on their way to worship. Oh, I said we do it. We give offerings. We put envelopes in the collection plate. We don't put a lamb or a dove in the collection plate, but we put offerings. And some people may have the same thought. Well, okay, I'm good with God. I have given my contribution to the church. Doesn't God now owe me something? Heaven forbid. No. Just you're never in a position where God owes you anything, no matter how much you put in the plate, how many oxen you bring to have sacrifice. Anyway, so let's keep going. Jesus says, okay, you're on your way to worship, and you want to pretend like you're righteous, that God owes you something. You're righteous. Then you remember your brother has something against you. You've done something wrong to hurt somebody else. It doesn't have to be your brother, it could be brother or sister, it could be a real sibling, it can be somebody in the church, it can just be your neighbor down the street. You've done something, and you owe that person confession. I have sinned against you. I'm sorry. Maybe you owe restitution. I mean, it could be. You owe something to this other person. So what makes you think you're righteous, Jesus? Now he says, stop. Don't even put your gift on the altar. Stop. Go reconcile. If you want God to reconcile with you, then you need to be reconciled with each other. Now, again, keep in mind, we're not saying that we can keep any of these commandments that Jesus is lumping on us. The fact is, I said that when I drove in today, somebody cut me off and I got angry. Well, what if it's the other way around? During the course of the day, do I know people who might be angry with me? Maybe some of them. But what if I cut somebody off in traffic and they're back there cussing at me? I don't know. I'm just driving on down the road. I'm good. But that person is very mad at me. Jesus is saying, I need to stop and go make myself right with that person. I don't even know who they are. And I don't care. I mean, I cut them off and I didn't even notice their car. My point is, Jesus has just given me another one of these impossible standards. I can't possibly know all the people who are upset with me. And if I'm honest, I mean, I may know some people I'm upset with, but I don't even know all the people that have upset me. A lot of give and take in society is anonymous. So I may have something against somebody that I shouldn't have it, but I have it because it's just part of life in this world. Anyway, Jesus says the problem with this one is, oh no, I'm sorry. Let me finish with that. Be reconciled and then come to be reconciled with God. That's his point. We have the same line, remember, in the Lord's Prayer. Forgive our debts as we forgive others. It's the same line. It really is the same line. Reconcile with your brother, and then God will reconcile. Settle matters quickly. You're going to court. Now, this is not really another example. It's just a continuation of the previous paragraph. But here's his main point. You're guilty. You're going to lose. That's what he's saying. Settle. Settle with your brother. Reconcile. Because you know what? You are not righteous. That's what he's saying. You are not righteous. So if you let it get to court, you're going to be thrown. What does it say? Hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and the officer you may throw you into prison, and you will not get out until you've paid the last penny. So you are guilty. You are not righteous. You're going to jail. That's your situation, Jesus is saying. Well, let's take the last 15 minutes and talk about my adultery. Here we go. And it's going to be the same logic. the Jews, of course, had a rule about adultery. You don't commit adultery. So, and that, you know, to most people's ear, that's an obvious commandment. You do not have sex outside of marriage. If you invade another marriage by having sex with either partner, now you've caused a breakup of a marriage, and that's what called adultery. So the Jews had rules about, who you could sleep with. It's very obvious. Don't sleep with a married person, and the married person can't sleep with someone else. Obvious. That's a good rule. And so the Jews had rules written around this. As long as you hadn't slept with someone who you weren't entitled to sleep with, you are righteous. And if you are righteous, God owes you blessings. That's the logic. And Jesus says, no, wait a minute. It's not that simple. If you've looked at another person with lust, you have already committed adultery.
Yeah.
I may be looking at the wrong one here, but it doesn't matter. The Jews had rules about divorce that are related to this. Because back in those days, divorce was something that essentially, although there is discussion of women doing the divorcing, it's something men did to women. Men could discard a wife because she burned the dinner. It doesn't matter why. If the man becomes discontented with the woman, he can write her what was called a bill of divorce, and she was out. Now, in those days, it was very difficult. I mean, there weren't very many honorable occupations for women. And so you were casting her into the street. Was she going to become a prostitute? She was in a very hopeless situation. It was very man-centered. The point was, to the Jewish mind, if I wanted another woman besides my wife, okay, there's a rule. I can get rid of my wife. I can just write her away. She's gone. And now I can go marry another. So if I want another woman, I could have another woman. And that doesn't, according to the Jewish rules, violate adultery. Because the divorce takes care of the first marriage. You can remarry, and so now you're not sleeping with a woman who's not your wife. Isn't that nice? So now I'm righteous. See that? How awful that is? The man thinks he's righteous. In fact, the local rabbi says, yes, you're right, you're righteous. What a horrible thing. So anyway.
Well, it seems like Jesus is bringing in the whole, like, it's a heart condition.
It's a heart condition. Very good. That's exactly right. So this is, if you lust after another person before you even get to the point of sleeping with them, you have committed the sin of adultery. Now remember, we aren't saved by not sinning. Don't misunderstand what I'm doing, and even what Jesus is trying to make it so that you cannot keep the commandments. He's not saying that you shouldn't try, but we are not saved by stopping the sin. We are saved only by the cross of Christ. So Jesus is just nailing another sin here. Yes, you are a sinner. Yes, you are a sinner. That's the message of this teaching. You are a sinner. We try to vindicate ourselves. And in the case of this divorce one, the men were vindicating themselves. Well, what we really want to do is get rid of our wife because she had burned the dinner. and I'd rather have another woman. So I do this paperwork. I'm righteous. I can marry anybody I want.
This basically twisting the law.
What?
Basically, the Jews are twisting the law.
Twisting the law. That's okay. You can think of it as twisting it. But you know, these were, I don't think we should assume that these guys had evil intentions, but they did create laws that could be manipulated. This one with divorce is particularly nasty because it was primarily men against women. The women had very little right. Now, Jesus does say that for the most part, this is a paragraph that in Christianity we've dealt with this and have come to a conclusion. Look at verse 31. I'm sorry, not verse 31. Verse 32. I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife. In the old days, divorce was very difficult to get. And then over the last, say, 50 years, things have changed and the attitude towards divorce has changed. And today, over half of marriages fail. So it's hard to say where we are as a culture on divorce. But Jesus says, divorce rules, remember, don't make you righteous or unrighteous. If a divorce happens, it's a brokenness that is real. God intends man and woman to be together forever. Anything that breaks that is sin. Now remember, we're not saved by not sinning. So this shouldn't be a prescription for how to write a divorce law. Jesus is saying, look, you guys think you're getting off the hook by your divorce rules. You don't get off the hook. You are still a sinner. Okay, let's keep going. They had rules about oaths. I'm not crystal clear on all the different particular oath rules that Jesus is referring to here. But depending on the nature of what I'm swearing about, I might be asked to swear on the temple or swear on the altar. You know, I swear to God, that kind of stuff. I swear by the temple. I swear by the altar. I swear by the gift on the altar. And here's the thing, depending on what you were swearing about, if you cheated and swore on the wrong honorable thing, temple, altar, gift, if you mixed up the two, then your swearing wasn't real. It wasn't effective. So I could say on a particular issue, well, I swear by the temple that I'm telling the truth. Well, for that issue, if I should have sworn by the altar instead of the temple, then I can go ahead and behave any way I want. The fact that I'm lying doesn't break the oath because I had the wrong objective. You following me? They had rules about when you swear, you have to swear by certain things. And if you don't, you're free to lie. Well, what do you mean I'm free to lie? Don't we have the eighth commandment is do not tell false witness. So how can you have a rule that says it's okay to lie? Well, Jesus is saying you can't. You can't get off the hook. When you speak, tell the truth. Make your yes, yes, and your no, no. And any swearing that you put on that is just silly. Now, some faiths have said that this tells me that I'm not allowed to swear. Like I go to court and I say, so help me God. There are people who believe that they're not allowed to swear. We don't take it that way. Okay, do one more. It's almost 8 minutes of. You've heard it said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you, turn the other cheek. Someone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2. It turns out that the Jews did have, this was called their justice system, uh, divided for eye, tooth for tooth. Now, just, I think to be clear, our system is not unlike that. We don't literally pluck out people's eyes, but we do assess the damage. If you're in a car accident, they are going to figure out the damage you did. What was the damage to the car? What was the damage to the person that was in the car? Did that person have a wage? And over the next 20, 30 years, how much would that person have made if you hadn't injured them in this accident? So this is not a completely foreign concept to us. Assess the damage. Now, to the Jewish mind, eye for eye, tooth for tooth was actually a limitation. Think of the was the Hatfields and the McCoys and their feud up in the mountains. It would never end. You would kill one person's cow, and they would come back and kill 2 of your cows, and then somebody finally would end up shooting some cousin or something like that, and now you have multiple deaths on both sides. So things were escalating, and the same thing happened in Jewish times. So one thought is, well, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, at least puts a limit to that. Yes, you should assess the damage, but the penalty should be no more than the damage that was done. That's actually a progressive thought. It can't get worse. Okay, but Jesus is saying, no, do not resist. See, in a court case, Jesus is saying to you, you've been hurt. Somehow you were hurt in an accident. You have rights. You could go to court and demand your rights. Jesus says, no, sacrifice your rights. You have a right to restitution, but you can also say, you're forgiven. Jesus says, forgive. Don't demand retribution. That's what that says. I tell you, do not resist. If someone strikes you in the right cheek, turn to them the left. Turn them the other cheek. Don't fight back. People always ask, does this mean I can't defend myself? Do I, if I'm unlucky enough to walk into a bad situation and I'm now being beat upon, or guns are involved, do I have any freedom to protect myself? And the answer is, Jesus says, you have the right. I'm not talking about your rights. I'm talking about your forgiveness. Can you stop the damage? That's what I use. When you think of participation in wars, Lutherans believe in what's called the just war theory. We can participate in war. A person can be a soldier and still be a Christian. You can be a soldier. But we believe that military force should only be used to resolve the problem. We don't invade other countries. We turn back the oppressor. So Jesus, we read this and say, well, Jesus is not saying that we can never use violence. But my attitude ought to be one of forgiveness. I set my rights aside and I forgive the other party. Now, they said, if my government tells me you've been drafted, you're now in the armed forces, you have to shoot your gun at those guys over in the tall grass over there. You can do that activity. You can be a military, be a soldier. Anyway. I do not understand about tunics and coats. I can't imagine having a court case where my objective is to take your coat. Except that I do know back in those days that the outer coat was a big garment and served the purpose at night, kind of like a tent. It was your protection. It was your nighttime protection. It was also your daytime outer coat. So potentially here, I'm seeing that Jesus is talking about court cases where people are suing each other because somebody has a nice coat. I can't imagine that. But anyway, again, Jesus says you have a right to keep what's yours. You really do. But don't use your rights. If somebody is in need and has asked you for their coat, your coat, give it to them. Be generous. Now, again, remember, we can't keep. Are you telling me that anybody that comes up to me, I need to turn over whatever they ask for? Am I really going to do that? Most of us would say no. We're not going to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
This is where I usually tell my 38-cent story. Those of you who've been in my class for a long time remember my 38-cent story. I was arriving at Trinity many years ago for a nighttime meeting, and I parked my car at that time for some reason. I don't remember why, how on the street. I'm getting out of my car, and somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey, buddy, you give me 38 cents." I said, I'm sorry, I don't have any change. And so I proceed to get my briefcase out of the car and get up to the parish house. As I'm going through the door, my hand goes in my pocket and I pull out coins. And guess how many coins I had in my pocket?
38.
38 cents. I had 38 cents in my pocket.
Wow.
So I am convinced that Jesus met me on the Duke Street, asked me for 38 cents, and I blew him off. I'm pretty sure. So anyway, that's my 38-cent story. I'll have to explain that when I get to heaven. I should say, if I get to heaven. Jesus is going to say, well, remember that 38 cents? That's why you're going to hell. So anyway, someone forces you to go 1 mile. This is where we will end. In the Roman system, any conquered people would be put into service, but it wasn't forever. They didn't become your slave, the Roman slave. It was for they could carry their backpack, carry their armor for a limited distance. This is translated as 1 mile. Miles is an English concept. Who knows what it was? But it was a reasonable distance that the person had to accommodate the Roman soldier. And notice what Jesus says. Okay, you have an obligation here to do what the guy tells you out of oppression. He is your conqueror. You have to do it. Well, okay, when you get to the end of the mile, what would happen if you say, if it's okay with you, I'd rather take your stuff another mile? Wouldn't that be an odd thing to say? The person would look at you, what? I want to carry your backpack an extra mile because I'm being generous. You can make me carry it a mile. You can't make me carry it 2 miles, but I'll do it for you instead. That's one. If you're being oppressed, luckily we are not in that environment. We do not feel oppression. but it's hard to imagine treating the oppressor with such a generous spirit. Few of us would be able to garner that kind of, I don't know what the right word is, generosity. Okay, I'm going to change the share because it's now noon. Find my Lord's Prayer. Here it is. Change this. Should do it all at once, but it doesn't. Okay, we're closing with the Lord's Prayer. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So I just realized now that I'm turning off the recording, I can say it